Hello and welcome. Our guest today is Patrick Lowe, and we're discussing the 2011 trade statistics and the projections for trade expansion in 2012. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you, Keith.
In 2011, a year ago, WTO Economist forecast trade expansion of 6.5%, but the final figures came in at only 5%. To what do you attribute this more modest trade growth?
Well, fundamentally, it's that output growth didn't increase as fast as we thought it would at the beginning of the year. Actually, by September, we'd already downsized our forecast, and we'd got 5.8. And so then the 5% was really a series of factors, particularly in the last quarter.
What were those factors? Mostly
the Eurozone crisis, which had a significant effect on exports from Asia. Don't forget that Europe is China's biggest customer. It was also linked to some degree to the flooding in Thailand, which took place in the fourth quarter, which had an effect, as did, of course, the tsunami and earthquake in Japan earlier in the year. I think in general what one can say is that the growth rates of the world economy, particularly the industrial countries, have been hit quite hard by the need to deleverage, the need to deal with debt. And of course in Europe in particular, and the situation got worse as the year proceeded.
And because of the expansion of global value chains, if there's a disaster of some sort in a single country, it can have a knock-on effect elsewhere, can it not?
Certainly for some of the supply chains, which are drawn very tightly, and you relying on particular locations that supply parts in the chain. If those locations are affected, you will get a knock-on effect right through the supply chain, and indeed that's what happened both with respect to Fukushima and with respect to the Thai flooding.
The projections for trade expansion for 2012 are even more modest than they were at the final figures for 2011. 3.7% expansion is forecast by our economists. What are the factors that have contributed to this ratcheting down in terms of our expected growth for 2012?
I think that the main story for that low number is Europe. GDP growth in Europe is predicted to be mildly negative for the whole year. And so I think...
Recession.
Yes, definitely recession. So I think even though we're beginning to see positive signs from the United States and Japan, these aren't going to offset the situation in Europe. And so the situation in Europe will directly hit exports from developing countries too. And so when we look at the developing country growth prediction, it's a little over 5%, and that is quite unusual. These are quite low rates. In general, I could say that the rate for 2011 and of course the rate for 2012 are significantly below trend if we go back to 1990. If you look at 1990 to 2008, before the Great Recession, you're looking at an annual average growth rate of 6%. So things are not that great if you look historically either.
And you see this trend continuing for the immediate to midterm future?
I think the need to address the debt problem is going to keep growth rates lower than they would, and that is a problem in the industrial countries, which will feed through into the developing world through trade.
What about the performance of developing countries in 2011? How did they fare in terms of trade, and what do you project for 2012?
I think the big story in 2011 was clearly the reduced demand in Europe for Asian exports, but perhaps even bigger and more notable is what happened to African exports. African exports contracted by 8%.
Why is that?
Because of Libyan oil. So not only is there a contraction story, but it's interesting why. I mean, this figure really speaks to the reality of the African export structure. It is highly resource dependent and particularly oil dependent.
What about emerging countries?
The emerging countries, their growth rates, there's a bit of a slowdown on their growth rates, but I think at least as far as Asia is concerned, that certainly has quite a lot to do with trade growth.
I see. And what about the projections for 2012? Do you see India, China continuing to post strong export performances throughout the coming year?
I think India is predicted to grow strongly, China less so compared to its historical record. And again, as I say, that is a demand factor as much as anything.
And the African picture, would that brighten now with Libyan oil output set to...
It certainly should get somewhat better.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you.